Willow Park Estates was often heralded as a jewel of suburban living in western Pennsylvania. The neat rows of single-family houses, each with a trim, well-maintained lawn and a lamppost in front, gave off a charming sense of community. The winding streets boasted maple trees that turned gold in the autumn, and neighbors generally greeted each other while collecting the mail or taking their dogs for an evening walk. Yet the quiet calm of Willow Park Estates concealed a subtle tension, one that tended to ignite whenever Fiona Marquette, a mid-50s woman on the Homeowners Association board, decided to patrol the neighborhood with her clipboard in hand. Most neighbors refrained from directly calling her Karen to her face, but that mocking nickname was whispered behind closed doors and in hush phone conversations. Beware the HOA Karen. Fiona, tall with a precise bob of iron-gray hair, prided herself on being the enforcer. She believed she was doing the neighborhood a favor by calling out any perceived rule-breaking, whether it was a mailbox paint job that didn't match the approved color palette, a lawn that grew a fraction of an inch past regulation height, or decorations she judged to be unbecoming. She rarely wasted an opportunity to scold or threaten fines. Despite Fiona's presence, Willow Park Estates had until recently maintained at least a semblance of harmony, with neighbors politely glossing over her more egregious interventions. But everything changed the day a new family moved into a corner house on Sycamore Court, the Donovans. This small family consisted of Jeremy Donovan, a software engineer with a friendly but slightly introverted demeanor, his wife Marissa, who ran a successful catering service from home, and their 8-year-old son, Leo, who had been born profoundly deaf in one ear and partially deaf in the other. Leo relied on a surgically implanted cochlear device to hear. Initially, the Donovans were thrilled to have found a house in such a well-tended neighborhood. They liked the walkable streets and the nearby community center, which featured children's activities and monthly gatherings. More than anything, they appreciated the HOA's landscaping teams, believing the well-kept environment would be safe for Leo, who was still becoming accustomed to navigating the world with his implant. They saw Willow Park Estates as a place of new beginnings. However, they had no idea that Fiona Marquette, aka Karen, was notorious for hovering over trivial matters, nor did they suspect that their family's special circumstances would fall directly into her crosshairs. The Donovans had arrived in the final weeks of May. By early June, they had settled in enough to host a small meet-and-greet barbecue in their front yard. Jeremy flipped burgers while Marissa laid out fruit salads on the portable table. A few neighbors showed up, a kindly retired teacher named Mrs. Lawson, a chatty mother of 2 from across the street, and a couple of curious folks from the next block who wanted to welcome them. Leo stayed close to his mother, occasionally covering his implant when a sudden noise, like a car honk, startled him. Though Willow Park Estates offered him the promise of a quiet environment most of the time, some abrupt sounds still made him flinch as he adjusted to the device's translations of his surroundings. About midway through the barbecue, an older woman with a rigid posture and a scowl walked up. She wore a crisp button-down shirt and carried her ubiquitous clipboard. Jeremy put on his best neighborly smile. "Hi there, I'm Jeremy Donovan," he greeted. "We just moved in." The woman didn't smile. Instead, she tapped her pen against the clipboard. "Fiona Marquette, from the Willow Park Estates, HOA. I've been meaning to speak with you." Marissa, wiping her hands on a dish towel, joined them. "Hello, Fiona. It's nice to meet you." Fiona's gaze flicked toward the portable grill and the small clusters of people standing on grass. "I see you're hosting a gathering," she said in a tone suggesting she was a border guard and they were smuggling contraband. "You did submit the required neighborhood event form, I assume?" Jeremy's eyebrows arched. "Neighborhood event form? We just invited a few neighbors. It's barely a party. We have rules about yard gatherings, particularly in front yards," Fiona snapped. "Large events can disrupt the tranquility of the community." Marissa folded her arms, trying to remain polite. "Well, it's just a handful of people, plus a small grill. Shouldn't be more than a casual get-together." Fiona pursed her lips. She flipped through her clipboard as though searching for an infraction. "I'll let it pass this time, but keep in mind that Willow Park Estates has a strict code of conduct. We don't want anyone stepping out of line." If I spot any unapproved activity, I'm obliged to issue a notice. The Donovans exchanged unsettled glances. Their hearts sank a bit, realizing they might be facing more confrontation than they had expected in their new home. And though they tried to dismiss Fiona's abrupt manner as a quirk, they sensed a storm brewing. Little did they know just how personal and hurtful Fiona's meddling could become, especially for young Leo's unique needs. In the days following that barbecue, Jeremy and Marissa took care to learn the HOA rules, both official, the ones posted online, and informal, the ones gleaned from neighbors with more experience. Some were understandable guidelines about noise levels and lawn maintenance, but others felt intrusive. Despite these minor hurdles, the Donovans tried to focus on ensuring that Leo settled comfortably. He had only recently received his cochlear implant upgrade, which came with an external component that needed consistent charging. Leo's device included a small battery pack that clipped behind his ear, plus a short wire linking to the internal implant. When fully charged, it allowed him to navigate everyday life with a sense of hearing far beyond what he'd had previously. However, if the external battery drained, he'd be plunged back into near silence on one side. For the first few weeks, Jeremy and Marissa had the charging station set up in Leo's bedroom, plugging it into a standard outlet. But the Donovans soon discovered that the upstairs wiring in their older home occasionally flickered due to heavy AC usage, particularly on sweltering days. One power surge had come dangerously close to frying the sensitive charger. The solution? Jeremy, who had a knack for technology, decided to purchase a specialized weather-resistant charger that could be installed outside on a dedicated circuit. The device also needed direct, consistent power and better ventilation so the battery wouldn't overheat. Setting it up under the shade of the carport seemed ideal, out of the elements but with good airflow. Marissa was initially hesitant. I'm not sure about leaving the charger outdoors. What if it rains sideways? Or what if someone tampers with it? Jeremy tested the device thoroughly. It's got a waterproof casing, and I'll anchor it discreetly. Besides, Leo's battery is sensitive. We can't risk these power fluctuations inside. This new station is built for variable weather conditions and safer charging. Leo, overhearing the conversation, felt a twinge of concern. It'll be okay, Mom, he said softly, voice still tinged with the slight lisp of children adapting to hearing their own speech. Dad knows what he's doing. Marissa nodded and ruffled Leo's hair. If it helps keep your implant running smoothly, I'm all for it. Within a couple of days, Jeremy mounted the outdoor charger behind a lattice screen by the carport. You had to peer closely to see it from a street. At most, one might spy the small LED indicator light blinking faintly, a sign that the battery was in place. Jeremy also installed a tiny surveillance camera covering that section, just in case. They felt relieved once it was done. Leo's device finally had a stable power source, and no more surges endangered the delicate equipment. Everything seemed peaceful for a short while, until Fiona, with her wandering eyes, caught sight of it. On a breezy Friday morning, Marissa was clipping some fresh rosemary from her front yard herb patch when she heard the sharp click of heels on the driveway behind her. She turned around to see Fiona Marquette, arms folded, lips twisted into a disapproving frown. Marissa Donovan, Fiona began, skipping a polite greeting. I've been made aware of some sort of device attached to the side of your carport. Marissa's heart sank. You mean the charger? Fiona sniffed. Yes, a box with lights. I noticed as I walked by. It is not an aesthetically approved fixture. Our HOA design guidelines state that any exterior modifications must be submitted for board approval. I see no record of such a request. Sighing, Marissa set her shears down. Fiona, that's our son's cochlear implant charger. It's a medical necessity. My husband is an engineer, and he installed it because the upstairs wiring is unstable. This keeps the device safe and powered. Fiona raised an eyebrow. Medical device or not, you're still obligated to follow procedure. A large piece of equipment outdoors. It's not large, Marissa corrected, feeling her patience slip. And it's behind a screen, practically invisible from the street. Fiona tapped her foot. Invisible is subjective. I certainly spotted it. You'll need to remove or relocate it to comply with aesthetic standards, or at least file the proper request with the board. Marissa's chest tightened. That charger is essential for Leo's hearing. Moving it inside puts his implant at risk of damage. Are you really going to fight us on this? A flicker of discomfort crossed Fiona's face, but she quickly masked it with her usual sternness. I'm simply enforcing the guidelines. If you have an issue, you may bring it to the monthly HOA meeting. But do understand, we can't make exceptions lightly. Marissa wanted to retort that the difference between a decorative choice and a child's medical necessity should be obvious, but she held back. Arguing would only escalate tensions, and the last thing she needed was an adversarial relationship with the HOA. Still, she felt anger well up inside. This was her son's ability to hear, not a silly lawn ornament. She forced a measured tone as she said, I'll discuss it with Jeremy. We'll submit whatever form is necessary. But we're not removing it. Leo's health comes first. Fiona grimaced. Submit the form by Monday, please. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to issue a violation. Then, with the air of a judge dismissing a case, she pivoted and marched away. That afternoon, Jeremy meticulously filled out the official request form, attaching photos of the small charger and an explanation of Leo's medical condition. He was careful to highlight that the device was out of direct view and that a child's well-being depended on it. They handed it in that very day, determined to follow the rules. But a creeping suspicion tugged at Marissa's heart. Even with the correct paperwork, Fiona might cause trouble. That, however, was only the beginning. HOA approvals in Willow Park Estates typically took a couple of weeks, as the board met only monthly. In the meantime, the Donovans carried on with their everyday life. Leo going to school, Jeremy commuting to his office a few towns over, and Marissa juggling her catering business. The charger situation hovered over them like a dark cloud. Though the device continued operating smoothly behind the carport, Fiona's disapproving stare whenever she passed by cast a pall over the Donovans. At last, the monthly board meeting arrived. Held in a modest meeting room at the local community center, these gatherings usually involved a smattering of residents, perhaps 8 or 10 at most. But Marissa, determined to protect Leo's right to keep his charger, decided to attend. She sat among a few other concerned homeowners, waiting as the board members, led by Edgar Holmes, the HOA president, went through various agenda items. Fiona sat 2 seats from Edgar, sporting her usual pinched expression. When the discussion reached the Donovan's request, Edgar cleared his throat. We have an exterior fixture request from the Donovan family. It's an outdoor charger for a medical device, specifically their child's cochlear implant. He glanced at Marissa in the small audience. Would you like to speak on it, Ms. Donovan? Marissa rose. She felt a wave of self-consciousness in the hush of the room. Yes, thank you. As you noted, this charger is critical for my son Leo's hearing device. We placed it behind a screen, so it's not an eyesore. It's also waterproof and meets all electrical codes. Fiona interjected with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I submitted a note to the board with concerns about the device's visibility from the public walkway and the potential hazard of an unregulated fixture. One of the other board members, Sharon Gallagher, pursed her lips. Marissa, does the device produce noise, or could it pose a safety risk, such as an electrical shock hazard to children? It's no more hazardous than a standard outdoor outlet, Marissa answered. It's sealed, and there's a breaker system inside. As for noise, none. It's virtually silent. Edgar frowned thoughtfully. Have there been any complaints other than the general aesthetics concern? Fiona's mouth tightened. The fact that it's there, in plain sight, is complaint enough. We must maintain uniformity in exterior appearances. This might set a precedent for other residents installing random devices. Marissa bristled at the term random device. This is not a decorative choice. This is for my child's hearing. A brief silence descended. Sharon and Edgar exchanged a look. Another board member, Zachary Lewis, a younger man who often championed more progressive policies, finally said, I don't see why we can't approve this. It's not harming anyone. If anything, it's providing a medical accommodation. Isn't that reason enough? Edgar nodded slowly. The Americans with Disabilities Act might also come into play, considering we're dealing with a child's medical necessity. If we deny this, it could open the HOA to legal challenges. Fiona's cheeks reddened, but she forced a calm facade. I never suggested we deny them an accommodation, merely that they place it out of public view or find a less intrusive design. Marissa forced herself to remain civil. We've done our best to keep it discreet, while also ensuring that it functions properly. After a few more minutes of deliberation, Edgar looked around, all in favor of approving the Donovans' request. For board members raised their hands. Fiona stubbornly kept hers down. Edgar tapped his gavel lightly. The motion passes. The charger is approved. Marissa, please ensure it stays within the guidelines specified. And if any modifications are needed, let us know. Relief washed over Marissa as the tension melted from her shoulders. She offered a quiet thank you and sat down. Fiona's glare burned into her, but Marissa tried to ignore it. The official permission was granted. Now they could focus on their lives without worry. At least, so they believed. No one in that meeting realized that Fiona's resentment would simmer into something far more malicious than petty compliance checks. For a short span of time following the HOA's approval, life proceeded more or less smoothly for the Donovans. Leo's charger remained in place, and he continued to thrive at school, slowly gaining confidence with each passing day of better hearing. Marissa's catering business had begun to boom, thanks to word-of-mouth recommendations. On the weekends, the smell of fresh-baked focaccia or simmering marinara sauce often drifted through the Donovan home, ready to be delivered to local events. Jeremy, for his part, had joined a volunteer group of technology enthusiasts who aimed to introduce STEM learning programs to local kids. But Fiona Marquette, or Karen, as many neighbors privately called her, did not let the matter rest. She stalked around Willow Park Estates, making note of any potential violation or oversight by the Donovans. She fixated on them more than ever, perhaps aggravated by the fact that her attempt to ban the charger had failed. One bright Sunday, as the family was heading out for a picnic in the local park, Fiona happened to be standing on the sidewalk, looking down at her clipboard. She glanced at the Donovans loading up their SUV. "Going somewhere," Fiona said, as though it was any of her business. Jeremy shrugged politely. "Family outing. The weather's nice." Fiona's gaze flicked to the charger behind the carport, visible only if one craned their neck. "You better hope that device is locked up. We wouldn't want it stolen or tampered with, or—" Marissa interrupted. "It's secured with a lock, Fiona. Everything is fine. Thank you for your concern." Fiona's expression soured at Marissa's tone, which was more dismissive than friendly. The Donovans pulled out of the driveway, leaving Fiona standing on the sidewalk, glaring at the spot where the charger was tucked away. Across the street, an elderly man named Mr. Wilder observed the exchange from his porch. He'd lived in Willow Park Estates for years and had seen Fiona badger plenty of neighbors. He shook his head in disapproval, but said nothing. Fiona was known to keep grudges, and few wanted to become her target. But an uneasy feeling gnawed at Mr. Wilder. He'd never seen Fiona so consumed by hostility toward one family, especially over a medical device. He wondered how far she might go to assert her self-appointed authority. A couple of weeks later, the unthinkable happened. It was a Monday afternoon, around 4 o'clock. Leo had just returned from school, excited to finish homework and then play a video game his father had promised to show him. As usual, he placed his implant battery in the outdoor charger for a quick top-off, leaving it there while he changed out of his school clothes. 15 minutes later, Marissa called for him to retrieve the battery. Leo dashed outside, rounding the corner of the carport. He stood by the little screen and glanced at the charger. The slot was empty. For a moment, he thought maybe he'd already put it in or that Jeremy had grabbed it. Then he spotted the shattered plastic casing of the charger lying a few feet away, half buried in a patch of landscaping gravel. His heart leapt into his throat as he realized the battery pack was missing, and the charger itself was broken in two. He turned, yelling, "Mom!" in a voice that rang with panic. Marissa came running, and her gasp of horror echoed across the driveway. She knelt down, picking up the pieces of the charger. "Oh my God, what happened?" Leo's eyes brimmed with tears. My battery's gone. Could it have fallen out? Did someone take it? Marissa was trying to keep her voice calm, but she felt dread creeping in. She noticed footprints in the gravel that didn't belong to any of them. Larger, sharper impressions, as though someone had stomped around the charger. Just then, Jeremy arrived home from work, stepping out of his car to see Marissa and Leo rummaging frantically behind the carport. When he saw the wrecked device, a flash of alarm and anger crossed his face. "We have a security cam, right?" Marissa nodded. "Yes, let's check the footage." They rushed inside, leaving a shaken Leo behind in the kitchen. On Jeremy's laptop, the camera feed played in a grainy black and white. The vantage point wasn't perfect, but it clearly showed a figure approaching from the side yard. The person, tall with short gray hair, lifted a foot and viciously kicked the charger. Then they bent down, grabbed something, and shoved it into a pocket. Jeremy paused the video, dread washing over him. "Is that Fiona?" Even though the figure's face was partially obscured by a glare, the posture was unmistakable. The rummaging through pockets, the hair, and the shape were all strongly suggestive of Fiona Marquette. A sickening feeling twisted in Marissa's gut. She took the battery, Leo's entire battery pack. That costs hundreds of dollars, and it's essential for his hearing. Outrage and disbelief warred in Jeremy's mind. Why would she do this? Even for her, this is insane. They immediately called the police non-emergency line to report vandalism and theft. An officer arrived and took their statements. While the footage didn't show the figure's face clearly, the resemblances to Fiona were staggering. Same build, same hairstyle, and the same distinct posture. The footprints matched a woman's shoe as well. Meanwhile, Leo stood by, trembling with anxiety. Without his spare battery, or the one that had been stolen, he was effectively limited to his older backup device that didn't hold a charge well. It felt like stepping backward in his progress, and tears of frustration slipped down his cheeks. Marissa hugged him tightly, whispering that they'd fix this, that everything would be all right. But deep inside, she felt an urgent fury. How dare someone, in their own neighborhood, maliciously sabotage a child's crucial medical device? Word spread quickly among the neighbors who heard the commotion. A few offered sympathy, while others expressed quiet shock that an HOA board member could do something so cruel. Still, fear of Fiona's retribution kept many from speaking up publicly. The Donovans, however, had no intention of letting it slide. They were determined to expose whoever did this, almost certainly Fiona, and to ensure justice was served. When news of the vandalism reached the local Willow Park Estates Facebook group, reactions ranged from disbelief to rage. Parents posted messages of support, condemning the culprit, though no one publicly named Fiona for fear of potential lawsuits or defamation claims. It was clear that many suspected her. Jeremy reached out to Zachary Lewis, the tech-savvy board member who had seemed sympathetic at the HOA meeting. After hearing the story, Zachary was appalled. "That's beyond petty. If it was her, she's crossed a huge line." Zachary offered to help by analyzing the surveillance footage. With better software, he might enhance the image enough to see more identifying features. He also suggested collecting any doorbell camera footage from neighboring houses. Marissa, meanwhile, tried to comfort Leo, who felt unsettled and betrayed. He didn't fully comprehend why someone from their own street would damage his charger. "Am I in trouble?" he asked his parents, worried he had done something wrong. "No, sweetheart," Marissa assured him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You haven't done anything wrong. We just had a mean neighbor, that's all. But we won't let her stop you from hearing the world. I promise." The neighborhood's frustration didn't end there. Some neighbors who had also been on the receiving end of Fiona's hostility began to speak more openly. Mrs. Lawson, the retired teacher, told Marissa about the time Fiona threatened to fine her for having a Girl Scout meeting on her porch. A young couple, the Parkers, revealed that Fiona once removed their child's inflatable kiddie pool from the front yard, deeming it unapproved. A wave of solidarity swelled among the residents. If Fiona could sabotage a child's medical device, what else was she capable of? The entire atmosphere in Willow Park Estates felt charged with a new tension, like a storm about to break. Jeremy, for his part, scrambled to replace Leo's charger. He ordered an emergency kit and had it delivered overnight at considerable expense. They installed it in the same spot, but enhanced the security camera coverage and added a motion sensor alarm. They didn't want to risk another sabotage attempt. Privately, they wrestled with the question, how could they definitively prove Fiona's guilt to the authorities or the HOA board? They needed a clearer image, an eyewitness, or something that would undeniably place Fiona at the scene. They would soon find that the solution came from an unexpected corner of Willow Park Estates, a group of enthusiastic tech-minded neighbors who believed in using their skills for the greater good, and who despised bullies like Fiona. A few evenings after the vandalism, Jeremy and Marissa invited Zachary Lewis and two other neighbors, Becca Reyes, a freelance programmer, and Tom Atkinson, an electrician, over for coffee. They gathered around the Donovans' living room, the tension palpable as they discussed the situation. Zachary had spent hours enhancing the footage. The best I can do is show a silhouette that matches Fiona's haircut, height, and body shape. But her face is angled away. The police might see it as insufficient evidence. Tom chimed in. We might not be able to prove it 100% unless she confesses or someone saw her up close. She's cunning enough to do it when no one's watching. A wave of frustration passed through Jeremy. So we're stuck with a battered charger, a traumatized kid, and no conclusive proof? Marissa set down her mug. We can't let her keep doing this. Leo's hearing depends on stable charging. If she destroys it again, Marissa's voice wavered with anger and fear. Becca spoke up, eyes bright with an idea. What if we create a community resource that not only keeps your charger safe, but also helps others with similar needs? Jeremy tilted his head. What do you mean? Becca leaned forward excitedly. I've been thinking about building a solar-powered charging kiosk in the central courtyard near the community center. It would be official and accessible for anyone who needs to charge medical devices, like hearing aids, cochlear implants, or even powered wheelchairs. If we do it through official HOA channels, Fiona can't sabotage it without facing major backlash. Zachary's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. We can propose it as a community service project. There's definitely a demand for something like that, especially for people with assistive devices. Tom tapped a finger on the table. I can handle the electrical side. Setting up a solar panel is straightforward. We need a battery bank, a weatherproof enclosure, and multiple charging ports. Marissa felt a spark of hope. That would also show that we're not just demanding special treatment for Leo. We're providing a benefit to the neighborhood. People might rally behind it. Jeremy grinned. And Fiona can't exactly sabotage a community-funded kiosk in broad daylight. It would be too obvious if it suddenly got destroyed. They continued brainstorming details. How to source the solar panels, how large the battery bank needed to be, ways to accommodate multiple voltage levels for various medical equipment. Zachary volunteered to present the plan at the next HOA meeting. A wave of optimism swept through them. Though it wouldn't solve the question of punishing Fiona directly for her vandalism, it would protect Leo's ability to charge his implant without fear, and do so in a way that publicly shamed anyone who dared to interfere. The group parted that night, energized by their plan. For the first time since the sabotage, Marissa felt a sense of forward momentum. Fiona might have struck them in the dark once, but the Donovans and their allies were about to bring everything into the open, forcing a spotlight on the cruelty of anyone who tried to stand in the way of a child's hearing. On a drizzly Tuesday evening in late summer, the Willow Park Estates HOA convened at the community center for its monthly meeting. The mood among residents was unusually charged. Whispers of the cochlear charger vandalism had circulated, and many people wanted to see if the board would address it. Fiona Marquette sat at the board's table, posture rigid and face inscrutable. She hadn't openly responded to the accusations. Edgar Holmes, the HOA president, had stated that without definitive evidence, they couldn't name a suspect. But the board seemed uneasy, aware of the simmering anger among the residents. Halfway through the agenda, Zachary Lewis requested the floor. He introduced the idea of a solar-powered medical charging kiosk with a neat PowerPoint presentation. This kiosk, he explained, would be installed in the courtyard near the community center, accessible to residents who need to charge vital medical devices. It runs on clean solar energy, has battery backups for nighttime or cloudy days, and offers both standard and specialized ports. It's a chance to make Willow Park Estates a leader in inclusive, tech-forward solutions. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. A few parents nodded enthusiastically. An elderly gentleman who used an electric scooter leaned forward, interested. Even Edgar Holmes looked impressed. "That sounds innovative," he said. "But how would it be funded?" Zachary glanced at Jeremy, who stood. "We're proposing to raise funds through a combination of private donations, local business sponsorship, and the HOA's community improvement budget. My wife and I will personally donate the initial solar panel. Others have offered to help with installation. We'd keep the cost to the HOA minimal." Fiona cleared her throat. "While I appreciate the spirit of community service," she began, "we must consider the aesthetic impact. A large solar kiosk in the courtyard might be unsightly. Also, who's liable if someone misuses the power station?" Zachary responded calmly. "We'd enclose it in a tasteful design, consistent with community decor. Liability would be covered under the HOA's umbrella insurance, just as with any communal facility. We're not talking about a big structure, something about the size of a tall bench with a canopy for the solar panels, tucked near a row of shrubs. It'd actually blend quite well." Marissa, sitting in the audience, spoke up. "My family would appreciate this, not just for our son's cochlear implant battery, but as a backup in case of future surges or outages. Others with medical gear would benefit too." A round of supportive applause broke out among several attendees. Fiona pursed her lips, flicking her eyes from the supportive crowd to the board. She likely sensed that objecting too stridently to a universal medical resource might turn the entire neighborhood against her. Edgar took a preliminary vote among the board members, and it appeared that 5 of 7 supported drafting a formal proposal. Fiona and one other member abstained, but they didn't mount a direct opposition at that moment. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors buzzed with excitement. Many approached the Donovans and Zachary, offering donations or volunteering labor. Even some who had remained neutral about Fiona's behavior felt this kiosk idea was a step forward for the entire community. Walking out of the community center, Marissa caught a glimpse of Fiona's tight-lipped expression. She met Fiona's gaze briefly. There was resentment there, mixed with frustration, but also a flicker of fear, as if Fiona realized the winds of public sentiment were shifting and she could no longer push people around with impunity. Over the next month, plans for the solar charging kiosk moved quickly. Tom the electrician secured discounted materials through a friend's hardware store. Becca Reyes drafted custom software for monitoring the kiosk's battery levels. Jeremy had the solar panel delivered, tested it in his garage, and found it generated ample power even on cloudy days. They scheduled a community build day for Saturday morning, inviting any willing neighbors to help assemble the kiosk in the courtyard. Flyers were distributed, emails circulated, and announcements posted in the Facebook group. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Families showed up with tools, and seniors arrived bearing snacks and coffee. Even kids joined the excitement, asking questions about solar power and how it could store energy for nighttime use. Jeremy was in his element, explaining the basics of renewable energy while he and Tom installed the panel. Zachary oversaw the kiosk's enclosure, ensuring it matched the beige and green aesthetic of the community center's exterior. Amid the hammering and drilling, a festive atmosphere took hold, like a neighborhood block party with a purpose. From across the courtyard, Fiona observed with a stony expression. At one point, she approached a small group of onlookers and made a curt remark about excessive noise, but no one paid her much heed. She left soon after, evidently realizing her influence was waning. By late afternoon, the kiosk was taking shape, a sturdy, rectangular structure with a sloping roof where the solar panel was mounted. Inside, multiple outlets and USB ports lined a weatherproof control panel. They even included signage reminding residents to use the kiosk for medical or essential device charging, with disclaimers about the HOA not being liable for lost items. Marissa felt tears prick her eyes as she saw how passionately people came together. At one point, Leo tugged on her sleeve, beaming as he watched the kiosk take form. "Mom, it's going to help so many people, right?" "That's right, sweetheart," she whispered, hugging him. "This is for you and everyone else who needs it." No matter how Fiona might fume, it was clear that something bigger than her vendetta had taken root in Willow Park Estates. The sense of community pride and mutual support overshadowed one individual's pettiness. The following week, the solar charging kiosk went fully operational. The board, and even Edgar Holmes, praised the project for its innovation and community spirit. A small dedication ceremony took place, where neighbors admired the kiosk's sleek design and took pictures. Leo got the honor of plugging in a test device, a phone, and his new spare battery pack for the cochlear implant. The kiosk's solar-charged outlets worked perfectly, eliciting applause from the small crowd. Leo's cheeks flushed with happiness. For once, attention felt uplifting rather than awkward. However, Fiona Marquette was conspicuously absent. Rumors swirled that she was furious about the positive reception of the kiosk, especially since it undermined her earlier attempts to shut down the Donovans' outdoor charging solution. The next evening, the Donovans were enjoying dinner when a knock sounded at the door. Jeremy answered to find two uniformed police officers. Behind them stood a grim-faced Fiona, arms folded. One officer cleared his throat. "Evening. We received a call about alleged trespassing on Ms. Marquette's property. She claims there's video evidence of your son damaging her flower beds." Marissa and Jeremy glanced at each other in shock. Leo had never set foot in Fiona's yard, let alone vandalized anything. The boy was inside the entire evening. Fiona peeked around the officers. "I have footage from my security camera. Shows a child around Leo's size messing with my roses." Marissa's pulse quickened. "That's absurd. Leo's been at home since 4 p.m. doing homework. We have no reason to let him wander into your yard." Jeremy spoke calmly. "We also have our security footage. You can check the timeline." The officers exchanged looks. One said, "All right, ma'am. We'll need to review both sets of footage. If we can confirm your son wasn't there, that settles it." But Fiona pressed on, voice trembling with venom. "I want the Donovans to realize there are consequences to meddling in other people's affairs." A chill ran down Marissa's spine. This was pure retaliation. Fiona was inventing stories in an attempt to harass them. The officers, sensing the tension, asked politely to come inside. In the living room, Jeremy pulled up their security feed. It showed Leo quietly working on homework at the dining table for the entire evening. The officer pointed out the time Fiona claimed the vandalism took place. Leo was clearly indoors at that very moment. One of the officers sighed. "Ms. Marquette, it seems your claim doesn't line up with the Donovan's footage. Do you have your recording?" Fiona fumbled with her phone, showing a grainy clip of a childlike figure in a hoodie stepping on rose bushes, but no clear face was visible. The officer frowned. "This could be anybody, and it doesn't match the timeline. We can't proceed with charges on something so vague." Fiona's face turned red. "You're taking their word over mine?" "You have no evidence that was Leo Donovan," the officer stated flatly. Meanwhile, they have a time-stamped recording showing him at home. After the officers left, presumably to file a no-incident report, Fiona stood alone on the porch, glaring daggers at Jeremy and Marissa. With a half-snarled hiss, she spat, "This isn't over," and stormed off into the night. Marissa closed the door, feeling shaken but also oddly triumphant. Fiona's desperation to lash out had begun to backfire. The more stunts she pulled, the less credible she appeared. In the weeks that followed, the solar-powered charging kiosk became a beloved fixture in Willow Park Estates. Several residents who used hearing aids or portable oxygen machines found it a convenient fallback. The local newspaper even wrote a short piece praising the community for installing such an amenity. Fiona's reputation, already on thin ice, took a nosedive. Whispers circulated about her false police report, her rumored involvement in the Cochlear Charger vandalism, and her desperate attempts to sabotage the Donovans. While she retained her seat on the HOA board for the moment, her influence waned dramatically. Neighbors no longer feared her petty citations or withering glares. Finally, an emergency board meeting was called when a group of residents officially petitioned to remove Fiona from her position. The reasons cited: unethical conduct, including intimidation and apparently fraudulent accusations against neighbors. The petition garnered far more signatures than necessary. Despite Fiona's indignant protests, she called it a smear campaign. The board and the community voted overwhelmingly to strip her of all enforcement duties. She remained a resident, but she had no direct authority to levy fines, send official notices, or patrol with her clipboard. The message was clear: Willow Park Estates would not tolerate an HOA bully. As for the Donovans, they found themselves at the heart of a more open, supportive community than the one they had arrived in. Leo's confidence grew as he realized the neighbors cared about him and supported his family's right to accommodate his needs. The occasional wave or friendly hello from passersby on Sycamore Court reminded him that, for every Fiona, there were dozens of kind-hearted people who wanted him to succeed. One bright Saturday morning, the Donovans and several neighbors gathered once more at the solar kiosk. They had decided to place a small plaque on it, dedicating the station to all who thrive through innovation and compassion. Zachary and Tom installed the plaque, while Marissa snapped photos. Leo stood close by, wearing his implant with pride as he beamed at the shiny sign. With the plaque unveiled, the group cheered. There were pastries and coffee, and for once the atmosphere in Willow Park Estates felt undeniably warm and united. Edgar Holmes, who had cautiously navigated the tension for months, offered a brief speech. This kiosk is more than just a place to charge devices. It's a symbol that our community supports each other, no matter our differences or needs. We stand for inclusion and kindness. As Jeremy looked around, at the neighbors who had helped them, at his son hearing every word, he felt a swell of gratitude. They had come to Willow Park Estates seeking a peaceful suburban life, and instead found themselves thrust into a battle with a small-minded but persistent adversary. Yet, out of that ordeal blossomed a project that benefited everyone and revealed the true heart of the neighborhood. Leo slipped his hand into his mother's. "Mom, everything turned out okay, didn't it?" She smiled, tears of relief and joy shining in her eyes. "Yes, sweetie, it really did." In the distance, behind half-drawn curtains, Fiona Marquette might have been watching, but her time as the neighborhood tyrant had ended, overshadowed by the unstoppable wave of community support. Willow Park Estates had chosen unity and compassion, and that choice had given Leo the sound of laughter, conversation, and everyday life, free from fear that a vindictive Karen would steal it away.